Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a second. We're going to let some more people roll into the Zoom room. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Payton. I'm the Associate Communication Specialist for the US and Canada here at the ICCT. I'm really excited to welcome you all to this webinar on the potential funding impacts for medium and heavy-duty truck electrification from the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard. First, before we start, I'd like to go over two housekeeping items. First, the webinar is being recorded. We're going to make it available on our YouTube channel and on the landing page for the webinar sometime in the next coming days. Secondly, everyone has their microphones on mute. If you do have questions, you can write them in the Q&A panel in the control panel at the bottom of your screen. After panelist remarks and presentations, we'll spend the rest of the time answering questions from the audience. So as you're thinking of questions throughout the presentations, make sure you get them into that Q&A panel. Our presenters today, I'd like to introduce you to Raymond Harris. Ray is the Heavy Duty Vehicles Program Director at the ICCT, as well as the Managing Director of the ICCT San Francisco office. With 20 years of experience in environment, energy, and transportation policy, he oversees the ICCT's heavy duty vehicles program work in the US and other regions. Thank you for being here today, Ray. Next, we have Jane O'Malley. Jane is a senior researcher with the ICCT Fuels program. Her work focuses on the sustainability and life cycle carbon impacts of alternative fuels in the road, aviation, and maritime sectors, and she's one of the authors of the report we're talking about today. Thanks, Jane. Thank you all for being here again. I'm going to drop a link to the report in the chat very shortly. First, I'm going to turn things over to Ray to provide some more context on why we're here today. So take it away, Ray.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and thanks everyone for joining us today. As you know, we recently released a publication that, for the first time, quantifies what are the incentives and other investment potential available through California's low carbon fuel standard. This study is important right now for a variety of reasons. One of those reasons is that California's policies that advance electrification in the transportation sector are at risk, and the state is working to preserve those policies. And here, in the context of heavy duty vehicles, I'm thinking specifically of the Advanced Clean Trucks rule, as well as rules that California didn't seek a waiver on, such as the Advanced Clean Fleets rule. These policies have been fundamental to California's transition to a zero-emission fleet, led by really the vision and the leadership of the governor, and also by the California Air Resources Board. But because these policies require a waiver from the federal government, and with a recent change in administration at the federal level, California has faced unprecedented attacks, really, on these policies. And its overall goals to deliver a zero emission transition in the transportation fleet are really at risk. So, given that context, we thought it was important to take a look at one policy that is not currently at risk, and that is the low carbon fuel standard, which, for those of you who have been following California policy, understand this has been in place for quite some time now and is fundamentally a policy that's designed to drive down the carbon content of fuels that are consumed in the transportation sector. Only recently, as part of the latest round of further improvements to that rule, the Air Resources Board decided to make some amendments that introduced some quite substantial changes that would make possible additional opportunities to generate revenue for investments in commercial vehicle electrification. So the question we had was, what impact will that set of amendments have specifically on commercial vehicle electrification? It's a question that's not simple to answer because it involves quite a lot of sophisticated modeling. But for that reason, we thought ICT was really well suited to address it because we have such a spectacular set of researchers who really deeply understand the low carbon fuel standard. And so it's my pleasure today to introduce Jane O'Malley, who is a member of that team, who is one of those spectacular researchers and is here to present to you all exactly what we found when we dug into the impacts of these amendments on commercial vehicle electrification. So, with that introduction and that context setting, I think I'll go ahead and pass it over to you, Jane. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Ray, for that introduction. Yeah, so today I'll be presenting a recap of our study that we recently published that Jessica dropped in the chat. I will now share my screen. Okay, can everyone see the screen? Great. Okay. So thanks again, everyone, for joining today. I am Jane O'Malley. I'm a senior researcher with ICCT Fuels Program. So today I'll be presenting results from the study that we published on ways that the California LCFS can drive medium and heavy duty electrification. As Ray noted in his remarks, in the face of federal rollbacks, the LCFS remains a cornerstone policy for supporting electrification in the state. In particular, last year's amendments include several key provisions to support these efforts. This includes funding for charging infrastructure, charging cost reductions, and point of sale vehicle rebates. So starting off, just a quick recap of those 2024 LCFS amendments. These were adopted by the board in November of last year and put into effect July 1st of this year. So the amendments increased program ambition to a 30% carbon intensity reduction target in 2030, up from the former 20% target. They also extended the program out through 2045, aiming for a 90% reduction that year. So this is emissions reductions across the entire transport fuel pool. The amendments also introduced what's known as an auto acceleration mechanism, or AAM. This is designed to stabilize credit prices and draw down the program's current crediting surplus. The AAM advances the carbon intensity trajectory by 1 year if certain requirements are met and can only be triggered once per year. The amendments also established a new crediting pool for fast charging infrastructure. And this crediting pool is in addition to an existing electricity infrastructure crediting pool for light and medium duty vehicles. In addition, 2 equivalent crediting pools exist for hydrogen refueling infrastructure, which we won't cover today. Each of these crediting pools are capped at 2.5% of program deficits. So for some broader federal and state policy context, California has faced a number of challenges towards its electrification efforts this year. In January, California withdrew its advanced clean fleets preemption waiver, anticipating pushback from the Trump administration. And in June, President Trump signed a resolution rescinding the preemption waiver for the advanced clean trucks rule. For those of you not familiar, the advanced clean trucks ruling sets zero-emission vehicle sales targets for truck manufacturers, while the advanced clean fleets ruling sets ZEV purchase requirements for certain sets of fleet operators. California has signaled that it still intends to apply the clean fleets requirements to state and local fleets and to maintain and enforce the ACT ruling. Then in August, truck manufacturers sued California for continuing to enforce ACT requirements. That case is still ongoing. So why does funding support for electric MHDVs remain important? There does remain a persistent funding gaps for these vehicle classes relative to combustion engine vehicles, particularly for the heaviest weight classes. So as shown in the figure on the right, you'll see that the median price of Class 8 battery electric vehicles increased 27% since model year 2020. Similarly, the price of transit buses increased 13%. In a recent analysis of market prices, my colleagues found that for certain categories, the cost ratio between BEVs and combustion engines has not fallen over time. And this is despite declining battery prices, which make up the greatest share of battery prices, which make up the greatest share of upfront purchase cost, and opposite trends that we have been seeing in Europe. So a persistent funding gap also remains for charging infrastructure. ICCT analysis has found that behind the meter charging costs account for nearly 70% of total charging facility cost. This includes installation fees for chargers and electrical equipment, as well as permitting and demolition cost. In our study, we estimate that class 4 to 8 charger deployment to meet California's charging needs will cost an estimated $7.6 billion over the next decade. And these costs are correlated by charger capacity, as you'll see on the table on the right. The costs reported here include hardware cost, installation fees, and electrical grid upgrades. So in light of California's policy commitments to electrify its medium and heavy duty vehicle segments and these persistent cost gaps, our study set out to estimate by how much the LCFS amendments can support MHDV electrification over the coming decade. So before we go any further, just a quick point on notation. In our charging assessment, we refer to medium and heavy duty vehicles as class 4 to 8 vehicles. So those vehicles weigh greater than 14,000 pounds. In contrast, the LCFS regulation labels these as heavy duty vehicles. For our vehicle rebate assessment, we assess revenue potential from all eligible vehicle categories. So these rebates apply to both class 2B and above vehicles, or those weighing greater than 8,500 pounds. In any case, we're eager to see expanding funding support for all vehicle classes. So moving into what funding streams the LCFS offers for MHDVs. The LCFS regulation specifies various credit categories with unique credit generators and project types, as you'll see in this table. This funding can then be used to support projects specified in the regulation. To start, we'll focus on funding support from base credits. So these are the energy credits generated from residential charging of electric vehicles. For this category, the credit generator is the electric utility, and a share of funding must be allocated toward point-of-sale rebates for MHDVs and battery electric motorcycles. So here to illustrate this point even further, you'll see that base credits are first allocated to the electric utility. Then, depending on the size of the utility, a portion must be set aside to fund the Clean Fuel Reward Program. The remaining credits, known as holdback credits, are then used to fund transport electrification projects, such as e-mobility and ride-sharing programs. If utilities are large or medium investor-owned, they must use 75% of credits to fund equity projects. Then smaller or publicly owned utilities allocate a lesser share of money towards equity projects. Importantly, any funding that remains beyond this allocation must be directed towards non-equity transport electrification projects, such that all revenue is being reinvested by utilities towards electrification. To describe more of the Clean Fuel Reward Program, this program is established in the LCFS regulation and recent amendments and provides point-of-sale vehicle rebates. A former program designed for the light-duty sector ran for roughly 2 years, and that program offered between $750 and $1,500 in purchase rebates. Under the new program that's been reinstated, vehicles weighing more than 8,500 pounds and battery electric motorcycles will be eligible. On the right in the table, we illustrate what portion of base credits must be allocated towards this Clean Fuel Reward Program, depending on the utility designation. So large investor-owned utilities must allocate the greatest share of credits towards the program. These utilities also make up the greatest share of delivered energy in the state. And then smaller and publicly owned utilities will contribute smaller shares toward the program. Now moving into revenue streams from vehicle charging. So the LCFS has 2 separate crediting pools that apply to charge point operators. The first one being non-residential charging credits. And these credits, like many other pathways, are based on the quantity of energy delivered to electric vehicles. The second generation category is for fast charging infrastructure. Now, these credits are more akin to project credits that exist in the program, and they're designed to stimulate demand for charging infrastructure. Infrastructure credits are proportional to a charger's utilization rate, with maximum utilization rates specified in the formula that I'll get into. So first starting out with the energy crediting formula. So here I'll just outline the crediting formula and how it works. Energy credits are a function of grid carbon intensity, the annual carbon intensity benchmark, and the crediting price. Our central crediting price and carbon intensity projections for this study are drawn from the California CATS model. I'll cover this in a couple slides. But to just lay things out, energy credits are a function of the annual benchmark carbon intensity, the carbon intensity of grid supplied electricity, adjusted by an energy economy ratio. This accounts for the higher energy efficiency of battery electric vehicles related to combustion engines. Then again, multiplying the EER factor, converting into megajoules, and finally converting these factors into tons of credits. So the 2024 amendments also established a new crediting category for heavy-duty charging. So again, this is for vehicles servicing vehicles that weigh more than 1,400 pounds. This credit category also has additional restrictions, such as the minimum and maximum nameplate power rating that can be serviced, as well as numerous geographical restrictions. These credits can be generated for a maximum of 10 years, and they can only be generated during the period 2025 and 2045. Here, like all the other infrastructure crediting programs, credits are capped at 2.5% of program deficits in any given reporting quarter. So to estimate the number of infrastructure credits generated, it's a little bit complicated. So we first had to calculate the number and capacity of chargers required to meet the state's future charging demands. So here we sourced charger installation estimates from an in-house model at ICCT called HDV Charge. So this model calculates charging needs based on input traffic data and ZEV sales shares. It then assigns utilization rates, charger capacity, and distribution needs across public and depot locations. The version we used for our study of HDV Charge is assuming that the ACT, the Advanced Clean Trucks ruling, remains in place, as well as Inflation Reduction Act tax credits. So we estimate that more than 100,000 chargers will be installed in California between 2025 and 2035, servicing these vehicle segments. A majority of these chargers will be overnight chargers, while roughly 1/3 will be ineligible to generate credits due to restrictions on nameplate capacity and average utilization rates specified in the regulation. So what does the heavy-duty fast charging crediting formula look like? So we reference capacity needs per charger based on results from HDV Charge for our modeling. Capacities given in kilowatts are then corrected by an adjustment factor of 20% for publicly available chargers and 10% for private depot chargers. So in practice, this means that public chargers will no longer generate infrastructure credits once they exceed 20% utilization rates. This is roughly 5 hours per day, while private chargers do not generate infrastructure credits beyond a 10% utilization rate. So running through the formula again, we first considered the diesel benchmark given in the regulation, adjusted by the energy economy ratio, and then subtracting the carbon intensity of supplied electricity. Then we convert into megajoules. This is then multiplied by an uptime factor, so the number of days in the reporting quarter that the chargers are operating, and then finally adjusted by the quantity of electricity dispensed. And then I think the final step is converting credits into tons. At the bottom, you'll see another formula that feeds into this above formula. This is based on the nameplate power rating of chargers. So there will be a different quantity of credits generated depending on the nameplate capacity of a given charger. Here, the maximum nameplate power rating is 2,000 kilowatts. You'll see that for the PI/FCI factor. So now outlining the credit price assumptions used in this study. So for this study, there is a wide range in results depending on the credit price assumed. We set the minimum credit price at roughly $50 a ton, the low value that credits have been trading at, and the current value credits are trading at in the market. Our midpoint price estimates are based on the CATS model, a version which was published in August 2024. However, credit prices have been trading far below the predicted values over the past year. So we adjust these values downward in the near term. You'll see the difference between the CATS model predictions in the blue line and the adjusted price predictions for our central case estimates in the red line. We then set our high credit price at roughly the price ceiling for the market, which is about $200 per ton adjusted for inflation. So what is the California Transport Supply or CATS model? This is a model that was developed by CARB, by the Air Resources Board, and it's used as an optimization tool to predict the future fuel mix in California. Without going into details, the model solves for the lowest cost solution for a given compliance scenario. So, for example, the LCFS policy that's been put in place. The model also has several constraints, such as the total number of credits cannot exceed the total number of deficits in the market. On the right, you'll see predictions that the CATS model made for credit generation across three primary heavy-duty fuel categories. So the model is predicting that biomass-based diesel, this is renewable diesel and biodiesel consumption, will start to peak. It already started to peak in 2024, while credit generation steadily grows for electricity and renewable natural gas. So now with that scene setting, moving into the results of our study. So applying the formulas outlined in the previous section, we find that the LCFS could deliver 8.4 billion in revenue to lower the cost of charging and charging infrastructures in the coming decade. So this is credits generated from the non-residential energy crediting pool and infrastructure credits. You'll see in the error bars a wide range of uncertainty in our estimates, depending on what credit price is assumed in the study. Another thing to highlight is the cap on HDFCI credits. So we do find that the 2.5% cap begins to restrict credit generation beginning in 2027. So infrastructure credits could increase by 7.4 million tons in a scenario where a cap was either removed or lifted. And we do find that raising the cap to 5% of program deficits would capture all of remaining crediting potential. So now digging a little bit more into what this funding stream means for the levelized cost of charging. So charge point operators have the ability to choose how to apply funding from both energy and infrastructure credits to lower the cost of charging at these locations. So we wanted to analyze how this affects charging cost at the charger level. So to do this, we reference NREL's EVI FAST calculator using inputs specific to our study. This includes California electricity prices in 2024, utilization rates over a 15-year charger lifetime, specific charger capacities from the MHDV charge model, as well as equipment installation and maintenance cost from the literature. So we wanted to calculate net cost of charging over a charger's 15-year project lifetime, assuming that these utilization rates remain constant over time. In this slide, we illustrate how the LCFS can lower the levelized cost of charging for ultra-fast, that is 1 megawatt chargers, depending on which utilization rate is assumed. We assume a 2% utilization rate for low, 4% for medium, and 7% for the high scenario. So we see that the LCFS can lower charging costs substantially, particularly for public chargers. So at these public charging locations on the left, we estimate that average net cost of chargings are roughly 27 cents per kilowatt hour for ultra-fast chargers that operate between 2025 and 2039. This corresponds to 52 to 78% cost reduction relative to a scenario where chargers did not receive any LCFS funding. We also see a lot of support at private charging locations. Here we estimate the average net cost of charging range between 41 cents per kilowatt hour for high utilization chargers and 74 cents per kilowatt hour for low utilization chargers. And this corresponds to a 26 to 39% cost reduction relative to a scenario where chargers did not receive any LCFS revenue. So to summarize, we see that the LCFS has a lot of revenue potential, particularly for low utilization chargers. And this helps to balance the high break-even cost of charger installation during early years of charger operation. Similarly, we're illustrating the net charging costs depending on the charger capacity and location. So across the board, we find that break-even costs range between 34 cents per kilowatt hour and 94 cents per kilowatt hour for ultra-fast chargers. On average, we estimate that LCFS revenue can reduce break-even charging costs by roughly 20% across all charger types. This ranges between 11 and 50%, depending on the capacity and charger type assumed. So I have a few more slides on how we estimated funding for the Clean Fuel Reward Program to deliver medium and heavy-duty vehicle rebates. So applying the formulas from before, we have an estimated $6 billion in funding available for medium and heavy-duty rebates between 2025 and 2035. Again, this value ranges significantly depending on the credit price assumed. We see that funding grows a lot as the quantity of base credits generated in the system grows, growing from 86.5 million in 2025 up to more than a billion in 2035. Putting everything together, we find that the cumulative revenue for charging of medium and heavy duty vehicles is roughly 8.4 billion, with the low and high credit prices listed here. Then we find that cumulative revenue for vehicle rebates is roughly 6 billion. Energy credits make up 50% of total revenue, whereas vehicle rebates contribute 40% and infrastructure credits the remainder of revenue. We also see that credit values tend to level off as these fast charging infrastructure credits phase out of eligibility beginning in 2035, and the carbon intensity benchmark or level of ambition of the program increases. One thing to flag is that although we do see a lot of revenue potential from the LCFS, price uncertainty does limit the maximum potential generated under the LCFS program. So our study predicts a wide range in generation depending on the credit price. So under the low credit price, in total, we predict $6.6 billion in revenue between 2025 and 2035. Whereas under a very optimistic high credit price, this is the $200 per ton, we estimate up to 26.4 billion in revenue over the next decade. And importantly, revenue for electrification is impacted by a number of external and structural factors of the LCFS. So for example, external factors that drive demand for other credit categories like biomass-based diesel, such as the 45Z Clean Fuel Production Tax Credit, can change the availability and supply of these other types of fuels in the market. Similarly, structural factors within the LCFS itself, such as a surplus of these same types of credits for biomass-based diesel, as well as credits from highly negative carbon intensity bio-renewable natural gas and biohydrogen, can change the supply and demand for different types of fuels in the market. On the right-hand side, I have a screenshot from Neste, which tracks credit prices, LCFS credit prices in real time. You'll see that there's been a lot of fluctuation over the last 18 months or so. Sometimes the market will respond to the amendments being adopted or different federal policy changes. But you'll see that in the last year or so, credit prices have started stabilizing around $50 per ton. In the past, we have seen prices as high as $150 per ton. And so to summarize with a few study takeaways, so through this study, we learned that the LCFS does present an unprecedented funding stream for medium and heavy duty electrification, far more than the amount of funding we've seen for other types of programs. And again, the quantity of revenue that the LCFS can deliver towards electrification is highly uncertain, and it does depend on external factors affecting the LCFS credit market, and namely LCFS credit prices. We know that energy and infrastructure credits can greatly lower the cost of fast charging necessary for heavy-duty fleets. We also learned that the cap on credits for fast charging infrastructure could exceed the 2.5% cap beginning in 2027. Raising this cap to 5% will capture full potential from these infrastructure credit categories. And reinvesting LCFS revenue into charging infrastructure and point of sale rebates can be an effective way to narrow the persistent cost gap for heavy duty vehicles, particularly those that are in the class 7 and 8 weight classes due to the high prices of batteries and overall purchase rates. So that's all I have for now. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Jane, for that presentation. I would like to remind everybody that you can place your questions for the Q&A in the Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen, or I believe it's at the top of your screen if you're on your mobile phone. So to begin our Q&A portion, we'll have about 15-20 minutes for questions. I'm going to pass things back over to Ray.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And thank you again, Jane, for that wonderful presentation. So I think for those that are new to the LCFS, this was probably a lot of information. So I want to try to get to some kind of core aspects of this set of amendments to really help drill down into sort of what are the key opportunities and vulnerabilities here because I think one thing that really sets the LCFS apart relative to policies like the ACT and the ACF um, is that it is a market-based mechanism, right? So this is a program that is basically transferring uh, revenue from the consumption of fossil fuels to the consumption of uh, non-fossil fuels, right? It's a sort of a fee bait in that sense. But the amount of revenue that is being transferred is very much a function of that credit price. So what I really wanted to understand, and this is my first question, is just how much of this total revenue that our study quantifies depends on that credit price. In other words, is any of this guaranteed?
Great question, right? So no, none of this is guaranteed. I think I had it on one of my last slides that there is a very wide range in revenue potential depending on the credit price scenarios. So credit prices, we did set a lower bound at $50 per ton, but credit prices could even drop below that. We have seen that in the past. So it really does make a huge difference in having a very high and stable credit price to help maximize investment or reinvestment for these medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification. So we do want to stress that that we do predict a very significant funding pool and significant funding streams for this segment. We do want to ensure that credit prices stay stable and they stay high enough to help maximize the support needed.
Right. And so my understanding is that this most recent set of amendments adopted by the CARB board actually had as a goal trying to create greater certainty of higher credit prices. Um, and so could you perhaps explain a little bit about what uh, what is the smart bet here, right? So we obviously bounded our analysis with a low credit price and a high credit price. The high appeared to be basically what the ceiling is within the program. The low end of things, I didn't get the sense that that was an actual floor, right? How could you just walk us through what are some of the ways in which we're able to predict the direction of credit prices and the likelihood that they will be on the higher end as opposed to the lower end?
Sure. Yeah, so the LCFS has seen a credit surplus in recent years. This was part of the motivation for the amendments that were put in place last year. So certain measures are really helping to tighten the credit market already. So the auto acceleration adjustment mechanism, this is the mechanism that will advance the annual target forward. If a certain share of deficit to credit ratio is exceeded, will certainly help to stabilize prices and maintain certainty in the future. However, it really depends on a lot of different fuel categories. So the LCFS is a technology neutral program. So it supports decarbonization of many types of fuel categories. So not only electrification, it supports credit generation from biofuels, from hydrogen, from gaseous fuel pathways like renewable natural gas. And there's a lot of interlinkages between these different types of categories and how that might impact the supply and demand of credits in the market. So stuff that we've analyzed, I'm part of our fuels program, so I do spend a lot of time thinking about the liquid and gaseous fuel pathways, is some trends we've seen in the biodiesel market and renewable diesel market. There's been a lot of facility announcements in recent years, as well as growth in sustainable aviation fuel, which is growing really rapidly in California in particular. So incentives that are in place that assign a very low carbon intensity to these types of fuels will increase the supply of these fuels in the market and decrease the credit price in turn, depending on the level of ambition. So in general, we want to ensure that there is an alignment between the quantity of emissions reductions these different types of fuels can deliver and the value of credits that they're receiving under the program. For example, we've done some digging into the negative carbon intensity values awarded to renewable natural gas and biomethane pathways. This is likely an overestimate of the actual emissions reductions that they can deliver in the system. So additional tweaks might be needed to the program to ensure that the market is tightened and we're actually incentivizing the types of fuels that deliver the most and verifiable greenhouse gas reductions. If renewable electricity is used, we know that battery electrification is one of the most confident pathways that we have to deliver greenhouse gas reductions. That's why we are placing so much focus and importance on this decarbonization pathway.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really interesting because it seems to me like there's this fundamental tension between the zero emission objectives of the state and the low carbon fuel standard program design, whereby more liquid fuels that are powering internal combustion engines are leading to lower credit prices. Um, when I say more liquid fuels, I mean more renewable or low carbon intensity, right? Fuels. And I guess it's not just liquid, it's also gaseous, low carbon intensity fuels. But their increase in supply, which is presumably motivated by high credit prices and the potential for credit generation, leads to lower credit prices, which undermines well, not so much undermines, but just reduces the amount of revenue available for the zero emission solutions that the program is providing incentives for. Is that an accurate description of what's going on here?
Definitely. I think you summed it up really well and very clearly. So that's what our focus is on all the work that we've done on LCFS. So given that it's technology neutral, we recognize that the need for opening things up to multiple solutions. However, we do want to prioritize the types of fuels and the types of technologies we know will actually deliver those emissions reductions. I think CARB has recognized this, and there was a recent workshop related to indirect land use change. That's another area of research for us, thinking about unintended or indirect emissions impacts of certain types of vehicle pathways. So we just want to be sure that there isn't a surplus of fuels in the market, weakening credit prices that are not actually getting us towards our climate neutrality goals in California. So all of this is sort of complementary policies that help California reach the scoping plan goals. We see the LCFS as a very important lever to allow California to reach its advanced clean trucks, advanced clean fleets, and
Mhm.
broader ICE phase-out targets.
Mhm. Now, one of the things you mentioned at the start is that our projections assume the Advanced Clean Trucks rule is enforced.
Mhm.
Also, that IRA tax credits remain in place. So, though both of those things seem to no longer be the status quo, right? I mean, California is certainly fighting hard and expects to defend its advanced clean trucks rule successfully. The IRA tax credits have been fundamentally reshaped by federal policy actions, both executive actions and by the major legislation passed by the Congress and signed by the president. So, taking those things into account, could you characterize what, let's say, the elimination of both of those things implies for the projections that you made?
Mhm. Yeah, all of those recent changes certainly add another additional layer of uncertainty to our projections. So our projections are first predicting the number of chargers required for California to meet these targets and these goals. So we predicted something along the lines of more than 100,000 chargers needed to service this segment. If in the face of these rollbacks, we predict a slower pace of electrification, certainly we would see fewer chargers on the market and fewer chargers being installed over time. So in turn, this reduces the amount of funding supplied towards these chargers. So yeah, there is certainly uncertainty there on the number of chargers that will actually be needed in the market. And in the face of rollbacks, will California actually be able to meet these ICE phase out targets? Seems less likely.
And then one of the recommendations the paper makes is, well, let's just frame it a different way. One of the observations the paper makes is that the current price cap for heavy duty fast charging at 2.5% will actually be hit, and that there's potential to go beyond that 2.5%. And your recommendation would be to consider a 5% cap that would actually allow for that full potential to be realized. So could you just say walk us through what that means in practice? What in practice does the 2.5% cap mean, and what would be different if we were at a 5% cap? Would we see more revenue?
Exactly. Yeah, so what we're seeing is we tried to first predict the theoretical quantity of credits that could be generated under this infrastructure category based on these the chargers we expect to see in the market and their associated capacities and utilization rates that we found in our HDV charge modeling. So first, just looking simply at maximum potential of credits, we're finding that it already starts to exceed the cap in the market put in place in 2027. Um, CARP has done some of its own modeling, very preliminary, it seems, in the CATS model to see if a similar constraint would be met. And they were not predicting a constraint in earlier versions of the CATS model. So we did want to highlight here that the theoretical or maximum potential is being limited by this somewhat artificial cap that's been imposed in the regulation itself. And we did do some predictions in this study. I don't remember offhand, but I believe it's more than $1 billion in extra funding could be allocated towards the market by simply raising the cap. So this sort of precision change could be implemented in the regulation to help maximize potential by allowing all these types of chargers that actually qualify for the requirements to generate the maximum quantity of credits in the market.
And since we're on the topic of, what could further improve the state of affairs here and how to further strengthen the low carbon fuel standard itself, we did get a question regarding just how CARB might adjust the program to avoid credit oversupply and close any market loopholes. Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Mhm. That's certainly an important question. So we certainly haven't thought of all the ways that CARB can help tighten supply. As I noted earlier, I think the introduction of the auto acceleration mechanism is a really good one. It's the first type of sort of mechanism we've seen globally in a major market, so that we expect this to be quite effective, I think, at helping to maintain and stabilize credit prices, draw down the surplus of credits we already see in the market. Um, and again, we do want to ensure that certain crediting categories are not delivering excess credits in the system. And how do you define excess credits? So essentially, like generating more credits than actual emissions we expect them to deliver. So for example, California implemented a cap on the quantity of vegetable oils that can generate credits under the biomass-based diesel category as well in these amendments. This is recognizing the upstream emissions impacts that are associated with vegetable oils, such as indirect land use change, deforestation, and so on. We think this was a good first step, but probably didn't go far enough at tightening the market and helping to rein in the very large surplus of credits we've seen from this crediting category. So that's one. And then again, for biomethane and biohydrogen, we think CARB can still implement some changes to help change this assumption that biomethane, biohydrogen have negative emissions intensity, in some cases up to negative 500 grams per CO2 equivalent. This is kind of a crazy number if you're comparing it to other types of fuel pathways. So, if you have a negative 500 grams of emissions equivalent, this corresponds to the quantity or the value of credits generated per energy delivered. We think this needs to be revisited, especially in the face of short-lived climate pollutant laws that are coming into place in California that require the state to make changes to capture more methane. So if these changes are put in place legally, we might need to revisit how we actually assess the emissions potential of avoided methane from these different bio-RNG and biomethane fuel categories.
We're getting some more questions in the chat, so I'm just going to try to get to some more of these. So maybe a more practical question, Jane. Are there any special features that chargers need to have to meet the LCFS requirements or to be eligible for generating credits? What is it that the regulation says the technical kind of requirements are for those that seek those credits.
Yes, so there are a lot of requirements. It's quite a long regulation, and amendments and can sometimes be hard to sift through, but we do try to summarize these in the paper itself. So for this new crediting category, there is a minimum 50 kilowatt nameplate power rating. There's also a maximum power rating for a specific site address, so not just a single charger, but the amount of energy being delivered for a single address. Importantly, for this crediting category that we focus on in this study, this is only applying to vehicles weighing more than 14,000 pounds. There's also some location restrictions that are intended to incentivize publicly accessible chargers more than private depot chargers. So this is helping to build out a network of charging infrastructures along federal highways. So the regulation has some specifics about where the public chargers must be located within 5 miles of an alternative fuel corridor. They also must be, in some cases, situated next to overnight heavy-duty parking. Another thing put in place is that so while the LCFS is incentivizing the delivery or the displacement of fossil fuel energy, in most cases, so whenever you're generating credits from liquid fuel pathways, from the electricity pathway, the most simple way of generating credits is to displace an equivalent quantity of fossil fuel energy. But these infrastructure credits are a little bit unique. These are designed to be more of a near-term fix to fix the chicken and egg problem of a lack of chargers and a lack of demand. So these chargers, infrastructure credits only remain in place for 10 years, hoping to incentivize build out now while we grow demand to meet those ACT and ACF targets in later years.
Yeah, one of the things I've heard is so attractive about the LCFS program's sort of capacity credits is the way in which they provide guaranteed revenue, right, in advance of utilization. So it's possible, in other words, to generate revenue simply by building something, whether or not anyone's using it. And in that way, actually have some more reliable revenue stream upon which you can actually go raise investment funding around, and then ultimately build something in advance of need. So it's a kind of a policy design that I think the LCFS does well, but I don't think that necessarily has to stay with the LCFS with thinking about other states that are considering their own programs and may have hesitated and already taken the decision not to adopt their version of an LCFS. Having some kind of a revenue guarantee mechanism for charging infrastructure, following the example that we see in the LCFS, seems to me like a really great tool. And certainly it seems to have led to the explosion of a number of charging service providers here in the state prepared to meet the infrastructure demands that are there. Um, there was a question about uh, how this assessment, and maybe it's whether this assessment is incorporating broader social costs. So the examples given were grid upgrades, local permitting delays, community level impacts that often determine whether infrastructure actually gets built on time. So I think this is trying to tap into, what we've seen sort of uh, with respect to energization timelines and the cost of delay that comes from attempting to build, particularly in areas where there already is maximum utilization of grid infrastructure. And we know now that, utilities have a process and it takes time for them to meet particularly large load demands. So if we're talking about, let's say typically larger than 2 megawatts, but even more common, let's say if we're upwards of like 5 to 7 megawatts, that can lead to quite significant multi-year delays if there isn't capacity on the grid. Um, how like how do we think about that in the context of what LCFS is providing revenue for? Is it going to help in any way with that particular problem?
Yeah, that's a very important question. One thing I didn't quite get into in my remarks is this need for grid infrastructure upgrades and the cost of those. So we did not directly assess those in this study. However, the base and holdback credits that exist for utilities under the program can be redirected towards grid infrastructure and electricity grid infrastructure in particular. So back to those allocation requirements under the base and holdback credits, we know that utilities must reinvest the entirety or 100% of the revenue into these types of projects. Depending on their size, there are specific requirements, allocation targets towards equity projects and towards these point of sale rebates. However, there does remain another funding pool that can be directed towards broader transport electrification targets, in some cases equity, like charger installations in low-income homes and multifamily housing. However, the regulation does explicitly mention that some of this money could be redirected towards grid upgrades. So we didn't assess the quantity here, but we do think this is an important tool, and also being able to streamline that amount of funding towards these types of projects is super important. There are cases where this funding is being held up, waiting for approval. And we really do think that it's important that this money actually gets out and gets reinvested into the market to actually see these targets being achieved.
Yeah, I think it's an illustration of just the flexibility that seems to be apparent in the low carbon fuel standard and how it keeps evolving over time, but how in this latest set of reforms, you know, we now need to pay a lot more attention to utilities, not only because, yes, they need to energize these charging facilities quickly, but also because they're going to have billions of dollars to to distribute as a consequence of this program, right? Your estimate was north of $6 billion over the next 10 years, and they're going to need to relaunch this clean fuel rewards program. And they also need to get the approval of the Public Utilities Commission with whatever sort of setup they establish for that, right? So it's going to bring the Public Utilities Commission into a conversation that until now, they've not really been equal partners, I would say, from my perspective. Um, I think CARB certainly has been in the leading role. CEC has been there supporting with their additional infrastructure incentives and other types of incentives. But now suddenly the PUC is going to be a major state actor overseeing effectively this $6 billion plus program that the utilities will be responsible for. And surely CARB will still be there, of course, making sure that's done well and effectively. But that's something that I think everybody needs to pay attention to. Um, I think we'll probably just need to have one more question, and then I'm going to hand it back to Jessica to close us out. Um, but I'll just go to the simple one here. When do you think CARB would entertain a next round of changes to the LCFS? What's your best guess? Do they have appetite for that?
Great. CARP is very receptive. They've done a great job at integrating stakeholder feedback and organizing workshops to get input from the public. So I think they certainly are very open to making amendments and making tweaks to the program to help improve and build upon its success. I don't quite know when the next round of amendments will be. This was a very big effort leading up to these 2024 amendments. I think it took more than 2 years of workshops and different stakeholder meetings. So I don't quite know yet. At this point, we have the 2030 targets locked in, but towards later in this decade, certainly it probably needs a revisit to make future improvements.
Well, and certainly we need to guarantee the success of the latest round of amendments, it seems to me, and they have so much potential to deliver on California's objectives here. So I would suggest we do our best to monitor and track, how well
Mhm.
that implementation goes. So thank you so much, Jane. Wonderful to learn so much about this study from you and to get all of your insights. I think now I'll hand it back to Jessica.
Thank you, Ray, and thank you, Jane. Thank you to everyone in the audience for your great questions. I know we didn't get to all of them, but I want to close out by turning things back to Ray and Jane with one final sort of closing thought. If both of you could just succinctly, maybe in a sentence or two, describe something that you want the audience to take away with them today after today's webinar, that would be great. Jane, you answered a lot of questions today, so maybe we'll start with Ray and then Jane if you want to go next, and then we'll close out.
Yeah, I think my concluding thought here is that California was smart to adopt a program like the LCFS that can maintain momentum on their decarbonization goals. And it now is up to us to support uh, CARB and the other state agencies I mentioned, including the PUC and the utilities responsible for the Clean Fuels Rewards program, to make sure that those investments are done intelligently in a timely manner and are aligned with the state's goals. So um, the LCFS is now on all of our radars. Let's ensure its full success.
Yeah, and just to echo Ray's points, we are really happy to see the LCFS being such an important program and a source of optimism in this space, despite what's going on at the federal level. We think CARB has done a great job at designing the program, and we do want to see its success. So, of course, continuing to monitoring and evaluate how effective these different amendments have been over time will be increasingly important. I'm also thinking about how changes to the ACT and ACF ruling will affect the LCFS market and charging rollout. So we just want to ensure that the program is as successful as it can be. So stressing the importance of maintaining credit prices at an achievable yet ambitious level is very important to help maximize reinvestment. So we're predicting that even at low prices, this can offer, the LCFS can offer more than 5 times the amount of funding that we've seen directed towards this sector since 2010. So we just want to see its continued success and ensure that things can happen.
Thank you both so much. And thank you again to everybody for participating in today's discussion. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. You can contact us at communications@theicc.org. And as a reminder, we're going to send out the recording of this webinar as well as Jane's slides in an email sometime over the next few days. We'll also put them on the landing page for the webinar. And just a reminder to sign up and follow us on social media channels and subscribe to our newsletters. Our fuels newsletter is called The Clean Ascent, and our HDV newsletter is called Fleets. Thank you again, everybody, and hope to see you soon. Have a
Thank you,
good
everyone.
day. Bye-bye.
Bye.